It was supposed to be just another corporate dinner. One of those semi-formal nights in San Francisco that our department threw whenever we closed a major deal. The kind of event where the champagne flows freely, the speeches are a little too long, and everyone pretends they don't care who's sitting where even though they absolutely do. Jessica and I had been to more of these than I could count. She usually wore a deep emerald green dress, the one she said made her feel powerful. I always reserved my best suit for these occasions. We were a team, or at least we used to be. I'd pull out her chair, she'd fix my tie, and together we'd navigate the social politics like it was a game we'd mastered. We had cues, glances, little inside jokes passed between sips of wine and fake laughs. Even when we didn't particularly feel like being there, we made it fun. For us. But that night, something was different. From the moment we walked into the restaurant, a polished, upscale place on Embarcadero with floor-to-ceiling windows and way too many wine glasses per table, I felt the shift. Subtle at first, like a frequency I couldn't hear directly but could feel humming just under my skin. Jessica let go of my hand as soon as we crossed the threshold. She usually clung a little when we entered events like this. Not out of insecurity, just a shared sense of orientation. We'd step in together, side by side, scanning the room. But this time, she broke off without a glance and moved ahead of me with a kind of purpose. Confident. Almost rehearsed. I didn't even realize where she was heading until I saw her slide into the seat beside Colin, the new head of marketing. He'd joined the company maybe 6 weeks prior. British accent, too many scarves for California, and that unshakable smirk that people either found charming or fake. I was still undecided. There were open seats on either side of the long table. I had pulled one out for Jessica halfway down on the left, out of habit. She saw it, paused for a beat, long enough that I thought she'd come over, and then kept walking, straight to Colin. She touched his shoulder as she greeted him, and then laughed, genuinely laughed, at something he said before she even sat down. It wasn't the "hi, we're coworkers" kind of laugh. It was warmer, softer, like there was a private context I hadn't been invited into. I didn't say anything, not right away. I just sat down across from them, tried to settle in, and told myself not to overthink it. People mix up seats. She probably wanted to talk strategy. Colin was new, maybe she was just trying to be welcoming. That's who she is. Generous, social, always trying to make people feel included. That's how I explained it to myself. But then the wine list came around. The waiter offered it to Colin first, probably because he seemed like the kind of guy who always orders for the table, and Jessica leaned in toward him. Close, whispered something near his ear. Then she touched his hand. Not a quick, casual brush. Not a "thanks for grabbing drinks" kind of touch. This was longer, intentional. Her fingers lingered on the back of his hand just a second too long before slowly pulling away. I stared at that moment like it was a freeze frame. The way her posture curved in toward him, how their heads tilted ever so slightly toward each other, how their body language locked them into a separate conversation even in a room full of people. I kept waiting for her to look at me, maybe flash a smile, a quick "we good" glance. Something. Nothing. All through the appetizers, she acted like I didn't exist. She didn't glance my way, didn't include me in her stories. She leaned in when Colin spoke, nodded in that slow, deliberate way she did when she was trying to really make someone feel heard. Her laugh came quicker, her voice lighter. It was like watching a version of her I hadn't seen in years. Younger somehow, freer, not a bad version. Just not the version she'd been with me lately. Meanwhile, when I tried to join the conversation, even with something neutral like, "Colin, where did you say you worked before this?" Jessica cut me off, steered the topic elsewhere. Once, when I laughed at a story he told, she's **** me a glance that felt cold, like I was intruding. It got to the point where I just stopped trying. I drank my wine, picked at my food, and let myself fade into the background while I watched my wife come alive for someone else. I felt like an outsider at my own dinner. After dessert, some flourless chocolate thing that no one really touched, I found her by the coat check. I wasn't angry. I didn't come at her with accusations. I just said her name quietly and asked, "Hey, what was going on in there?" She barely looked up from her phone. What do you mean? I shrugged, trying to keep my voice even. You sat with Colin, barely talked to me all night. I'm just wondering if everything's okay. She let out a sigh. Not an exhausted sigh, a theatrical one, like I just asked the dumbest question in the world. You're being weird, she said. Seriously, it's a work dinner, not couples therapy. I know, I said. It just felt off, that's all. And that's when she really turned. She crossed her arms, tilted her head slightly, and delivered it like a pre-loaded response. You embarrassed yourself tonight. Honestly, I think you need to take a look at how jealous you're being. It's not a good look, Steve. That was the first time I heard it. The script. Because it didn't sound like a spontaneous reaction. It didn't feel organic. It felt rehearsed, practiced, like she'd run this conversation through her head before, like she already knew what I was going to say and had the response ready. In her version, I was the problem, the clingy husband, the insecure one making something out of nothing, and she was the innocent one, just being friendly, just networking, just trying to have a nice evening until I made it weird. She flipped it so fast I almost doubted my own memory of the night. But deep down, I knew what I saw. I know my wife. I know how she acts when she's uncomfortable, when she's bored, when she's performing. I also know how she acts when she's emotionally invested in someone. And that night, sitting beside Colin, laughing, whispering, touching his hand like it was second nature. She wasn't just being polite. She was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I wasn't invited. She tucked her hair behind her ear again and said, "Let's not ruin the night, okay? Just drop it." And she turned away. I didn't say anything else. I didn't follow her out. I stood there in my jacket, hands in my pockets, watching her walk out into the night with that same relaxed stride she used to have with me. I realized something right then, not just about the night but about the whole dynamic. This wasn't an isolated moment. It was a doorway, a carefully prepared excuse, a future retelling already forming in her head. Steve was always suspicious, always jealous. He couldn't handle my work friends. He ruined things with his insecurity. She'd built the alibi before the crime, and I was just beginning to understand how deep the script might go. That night I didn't sleep, not even a little. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Jessica showered and did her whole nightly routine like nothing had happened. She climbed into bed beside me afterward, scrolling through her phone for a while before eventually turning off the light and rolling away. She didn't say goodnight. I didn't either. Instead, I just lay there in the dark, trying to talk myself out of what I already knew. It's easy to convince yourself you're being paranoid, especially when the person you love is feeding you a story with just enough plausibility to keep your doubts quiet. But once that story cracks, even a little, the silence that follows is unbearable. I started replaying everything in my head, trying to pinpoint when exactly things had started feeling different. That dinner wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time it showed itself in full. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how many strange little moments had piled up lately, moments I'd brushed off or chalked up to stress. Like a month ago, when Jessica started working late more often than usual. She's always been career-driven, that's one of the reasons I admired her, but suddenly, she was staying 2-3 hours past office close. "Big campaign coming up," she said. "Colin wants all hands on deck." At first, I didn't question it. I figured she was trying to impress the new department head. Maybe he was putting pressure on the team. But the frequency was hard to ignore. The pattern too precise. Mondays, Wednesdays, sometimes Fridays. Always the same vague explanation. Meeting ran long, or we had to stay behind and hash out next week's targets. I never once saw her bring home any materials. She never complained about the work, never looked tired from it. Just walked in late, kissed me on the cheek like she was checking off a box, and disappeared into the bathroom. That's when the new habit started, taking phone calls in there. It began casually, a few work calls, usually in the evening. Then she started closing the door, then locking it, then laughing quietly, like the conversation wasn't stressful at all, like she was talking to a friend, or maybe someone closer. I asked her once, "Who was that?" She said, "Just work stuff. Boring." Her tone was light, but her eyes didn't meet mine. And the phone itself, it changed too. Jessica used to leave her phone on the kitchen counter, on the armrest, face up and unlocked. Now it was always face down, or in her pocket, or tucked under a pillow. She added Face ID to her phone, something she'd once called annoying and unnecessary. And when I asked about it, she said, "It's just safer this way, with work stuff." But the biggest moment, the one I kept circling back to in my mind, was 2 weeks before the dinner. I'd been getting dressed for work, and as I walked past our bed, I noticed something small and shiny on the carpet. I bent down and picked it up, a silver cufflink. Not mine. I don't even wear cufflinks unless it's a wedding or some kind of formal gala. And I definitely didn't own anything like this one, sleek, modern design, engraved with a tiny, intricate pattern. It didn't match any of my sets. At the time, I brushed it off. Maybe it had fallen out of a guest's jacket during our last dinner party, though I couldn't remember anyone wearing French cuffs. I tossed it in the top drawer of my nightstand and forgot about it. Until now, lying in bed that night, with Jessica quietly breathing beside me, I thought about that cufflink in a whole new light. I got up, quietly so I wouldn't wake her, and retrieved it from the drawer. I held it under the lamp. Sleek, polished, expensive-looking. Something Colin would wear. Something I could now very easily picture slipping off while tangled in bedsheets that I thought only held memories of us. I put it back without a word. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, not yet. But something had broken open inside me, and there was no way to close it now. I was starting to see the pattern. Not isolated moments. Not coincidences. Pattern. Her absences. The secrecy. The new closeness with Colin. Her sudden defensiveness. The subtle rewriting of our dynamic where she was the one holding it together, and I was the unstable one. It all came back to me again the next morning. I was making coffee, and Jessica walked in wearing a robe, freshly showered, hair wrapped in a towel. She kissed my cheek. Light, automatic. "How'd you sleep?" she asked. "Not great," I said. "Still stressed about work?" I didn't answer, just stirred my coffee and watched her out of the corner of my eye. She moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened the night before, like we hadn't just had the most disconnected evening of our marriage. Like the way she had acted at dinner was completely normal. Her phone buzzed twice while she reached for the orange juice. She glanced at it and smiled. A small, involuntary smile. "You've been getting a lot of messages lately," I said. She didn't look up. "Yeah. Group chats going off again. Michelle's birthday thing next month." She poured her juice, set the bottle back in the fridge, and walked out of the kitchen without saying anything else. A minute later, I heard her laugh softly from the other room. I waited to hear another voice. Maybe a podcast, but there was only silence. Just her and her phone. I thought about the way she used to fill me in on everything. The tiny office dramas, her coworkers' weird lunches, the offbeat jokes from her desk buddy. I used to know everyone in her stories. Now it was like there was a whole other narrative, one I wasn't allowed into. Like I was no longer part of the world she occupied most of the day. Later that evening, I mentioned I'd bumped into someone from her office in the elevator at my building. An older woman named Karen, who sometimes consulted with their department. We made small talk. Nothing big. But I thought Jessica would have at least acknowledged it. Instead, she froze. Not dramatically, just a slight stiffening in her shoulders. Her eyes flicked toward mine, then away again, and she said, "Oh yeah, Karen's still around. She's funny." Then she changed the subject. Quick, too quick. I let it go, but my stomach dropped in a way I couldn't explain. She was hiding something. Maybe not an affair, not yet, but something real. Something big enough that she had to pre-write explanations for her behavior, change the way she carried her phone, shift her tone when she talked to me. The next day, I went looking for the cufflink again. It was gone. I searched every drawer under the bed, in the laundry bin. Nothing. I hadn't moved it. Jessica had. That told me more than I wanted to know. Whatever she was involved in, it was serious enough that she was covering her tracks. It wasn't random anymore. It wasn't spontaneous. It was careful. And that was what scared me most. Because if she could hide something like this, and still smile at me, kiss me goodnight, pour juice in the morning like everything was fine, then she wasn't just drifting. She was already gone. 3 days later, Jessica told me she was flying to Seattle. She said it casually, like it was an afterthought. We were eating dinner, the TV murmuring in the background, and she mentioned it between bites of pasta. I've got a 2-day seminar. Leadership development thing. I'll be back late Thursday. I nodded. Didn't ask questions. Didn't react. If this had been a week earlier, I might have asked where she was staying, who else was going, whether she wanted me to drive her to the airport. This time I just said, okay, and kept eating. She watched me for a moment, like she was waiting for something. When it didn't come, she relaxed. That told me everything. The morning she left, she hugged me a little longer than usual, told me she'd miss me, kissed my cheek twice. All the right gestures carefully performed. Then she grabbed her carry-on and walked out the door. I waited until her car was gone before I moved. There was something mechanical about what I did next. No anger, no shaking hands, just focus. Like a switch had flipped somewhere inside me, and I was operating on instinct alone. That afternoon, I logged into our old shared photo cloud. We'd set it up years ago, back when we thought sharing everything was romantic. Over time, we'd mostly stopped using it, but the settings were still there. Automatic uploads, duplicates, background syncing. She'd probably forgotten about it. I didn't expect to find anything. Not really. Part of me still hoped I'd open it up and see nothing but **TS and blurry photos of conference rooms. But there it was. A new folder. Time-stamped from that very morning. The first photo was harmless enough. A hotel lobby. Polished marble floors. A chandelier. I zoomed in on the logo by the front desk and recognized the brand immediately. Not a budget seminar hotel. Something nicer. The next photo was dinner. A small round table. White tablecloth. 2 wine glasses. A candle between them. Only one plate visible, but the angle suggested someone was sitting across from her. I noticed the reflection in the glass. A man's shoulder. Suit jacket. Dark. I kept scrolling. There was a photo of her sandals on patterned carpet. The hotel logo stitched into it. Not a seminar room. A hallway. My heart was steady. Too steady. And then I saw it. The last photo. At first glance, it looked like an accident. A reflection in a window. City lights outside. Her legs visible, knees angled slightly inward. And then, unmistakably, a man's hand resting on her knee. Not hovering. Not reaching. Resting. Possessive. Familiar. I didn't need to see his face. I knew that hand. I'd watched it gesture across conference tables. I'd shaken it at the dinner. I'd seen it cradle a wine glass while he smiled at my wife. It was Colin. There was no ambiguity left. No interpretation. No, maybe I'm overreacting. This wasn't a text taken out of context. This wasn't emotional closeness that could be explained away. This was physical. **mate. Comfortable. This was real. I sat there for a long time, staring at that image, waiting to feel something explode inside me. Rage. Grief. Shock. Instead, I felt clarity. Everything snapped into place so cleanly it was almost disturbing. The late nights. The cufflink. The laughter behind bathroom doors. The rewritten stories. The way she'd looked at him like I used to think she looked at me. I closed the laptop and sat back. That was it. No more doubts. That night, she texted me from Seattle. Long day. Exhausted. Miss you. I didn't reply. The next day, she sent another message. A photo of a conference badge. Brain fried. Can't wait to be home. I didn't reply. I wasn't punishing her. I wasn't playing games. I was done engaging with the lie. Instead, I started collecting facts. I reopened the cloud and downloaded everything. I checked the metadata on the photos, timestamps, locations. Cross-referenced them with her flight itinerary, which I found in her email. The seminar dinner was the same night Colin had conveniently posted about being on the road for work. I didn't rush. I didn't skip steps. I rebuilt the timeline slowly, carefully. Each detail confirmed the next. The overlaps were too perfect to be accidental. Two people coordinating travel under the guise of professional obligations. By the time Thursday came around, I wasn't angry anymore. I was prepared. When she texted that her flight had landed and she'd be home soon, I finally responded. Okay. Just one word. Neutral. Unloaded. She came home smiling, dropped her bag by the door, started telling me about the trip like nothing had happened. I watched her move around the kitchen, listened to her voice, and realized something unsettling. She had no idea how much I knew, and she still thought she was in control of the story. I let her talk, let her settle back into the rhythm of our home. Because now, for the first time since all this began, I wasn't chasing the truth anymore. I was standing on it. I didn't confront her that night. Not the next morning either. I know how that sounds. Cowardly, maybe, but it wasn't fear. It was control, something I hadn't felt in weeks, months even. There's power in knowing something someone else doesn't think you know. Power in watching them perform, unaware they're acting on a stage that's already crumbling beneath them. She came home from Seattle with stories. Not many, just enough to fill space. She said the seminar was dense but inspiring, said the hotel pillows were too soft, and that she'd wished I was there to make it tolerable. I nodded, smiled in the right places, asked follow-up questions I already knew the answers to. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but not enough to say anything. That weekend, I began building the timeline. I created a folder on my laptop called Q4 Travel Review and password protected it. If she ever stumbled across it, she'd assume it was work-related. We both had the habit of labeling things vaguely to avoid interruptions. Inside the folder, I laid it all out. Organized. Undeniable. First, I downloaded her flight history from our airline account. She'd never bothered to create her own profile, said it was easier to book through mine. I could see every departure and arrival, confirmed dates, confirmed cities. Then I pulled up her emails. She rarely cleared her inbox, and she hadn't signed out of the desktop client on our shared computer. I searched for hotel confirmations, forwarded invites, subject lines like off-site strategy or leadership mixer. They were all there, every paper trail. Side by side, I matched each trip to a corresponding one of Colin's. Sometimes he mentioned them in his own social media posts, tagged locations, short captions. Other times I had to dig deeper, like checking company press releases or employee LinkedIn activity. If it had been once, maybe twice, I could have pretended it was a coincidence. But the overlaps were everywhere. 6 cities, 11 nights. And every time, Jessica returned with that same overly bright energy, the kind of glow that doesn't come from business presentations. There was even a conference in Chicago where their flights were booked just 2 hours apart. Different airlines, same destination, same week. She told me she hated Chicago. Came home talking about how the city was growing on her. I dropped pins on a digital map, added dates, compiled **TS of their respective travel. I built a spreadsheet not out of spite, but because I needed to see it clearly. Needed it to be undeniable. And then came the messages. Not explicit ones, they were smarter than that. But her photo cloud, the one she forgot was still backing up, had more than just pictures. It had **TS, clips, notes. There was one note saved to her phone with a grocery list and, buried at the bottom, a quote. "I don't want to imagine what life looked like before I met you." Copied it, pasted it into Google. Found it in a message Colin had posted on a now-deleted comment thread on his Instagram. A reply to someone he hadn't tagged. But the date matched. I didn't even have to guess who it was for. There were other messages, too. Snippets from WhatsApp previews I caught in the cloud's auto-forwarded backups. Nothing overt. Just too warm. Too personal. That part of the city made me think of you. Missed your laugh today. Wish you were here. But also glad you're not. I wouldn't have gotten any work done. If you didn't know her, they'd sound poetic. But I knew her. I knew what she sounded like when she was falling for someone. She used to sound that way with me, so I kept collecting. I took photos of everything, her texts, the calendar events, even the cufflink I eventually found again, tucked in the back of her jewelry box. I created a backup drive and encrypted the folder. Labeled it Project Archive. Some nights she worked late again. Other nights, she curled up next to me on the couch like nothing had changed. She'd reach for my hand, and I'd give it to her. Not because I wanted to, but because I was learning something important. You can't fight a performance with emotion. You have to beat it with evidence. When you act from emotion, you lose control. When you act with precision, you take control back. One night, while she was asleep beside me, I copied her entire phone backup to an external drive. She hadn't changed her iCloud password in over a year. I found deleted photos. Not many, just enough. One was of a bar. Not particularly romantic, just a city view. But in the reflection of a glass behind the counter, you could see two blurred faces. Hers and his. Another was of a room service tray, cup of tea, 2 forks on 1 slice of cake. In isolation, these could mean anything. But when you placed them beside the travel logs, the timing, the texts, it was unmistakable. They were a we, and I was the extra in my own life. By the end of the second week, I had more than enough to confront her. But I didn't, because something shifted. I didn't want an apology. I didn't want drama. I didn't want her to cry or explain or beg. I didn't want her version of what happened. I wanted peace, and I realized I wouldn't get it from her. So I started thinking differently. I started preparing. Not just emotionally, practically. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. Not to file. Not yet. Just to understand what my options were. I brought the evidence all neatly categorized. She reviewed it without comment, nodding slowly as she scrolled through. "You're very organized," she said. "I've had time," I replied. The lawyer didn't offer pity. That's why I chose her. She gave me facts. Division of property. Length of marriage. What counts as fault in our state. What I could expect. What Jessica might. I walked out of that meeting with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. That weekend, Jessica asked if I wanted to go hiking. Just the two of us. A trail we used to love before life got busy. I said yes, and we went. She smiled more than usual. Took photos of wildflowers. Talked about reconnecting. I nodded, smiled, kept pace. Because I wasn't trying to fix us anymore. I was learning how to leave without making noise. I always thought the confrontation would be the climax. The dramatic scene where the truth comes crashing down, and everything changes in one loud, explosive moment. But as the days passed and Jessica continued her performance, the soft smiles, the perfectly timed affection, the light conversation over dinner, I realized something else. She wasn't living in denial. She was living in a version of reality she had authored herself. And like any good writer, she was editing as she went. Trimming what didn't fit, rewriting scenes where she looked better, cleaner, innocent. I wasn't part of that narrative anymore. At least not as a partner. I was a prop, placeholder. That's when I decided, if she was going to live inside a story, I would take my role seriously, as the man who quietly steps out of frame and lets the real truth be seen by someone else who deserved it. Sarah, Colin's wife. I'd never met her formally. I'd only seen her once at a work mixer nearly a year ago. Tall, confident, the kind of woman who seemed like she could outplan an emergency response team while running a marathon. She and Colin were the power couple of their friend group, at least from what I heard. Jessica had mentioned her once, vaguely, in a way that suggested Sarah wasn't someone you crossed lightly. Perfect. That Sunday, Jessica left to meet a friend for brunch. She kissed me on the cheek, said she'd be back in a couple hours, and reminded me there were leftovers in the fridge. Like nothing was happening. Like we were still a team. The door closed behind her, and 5 minutes later, I grabbed the folder. It wasn't labeled anything dramatic. Just personal reference. Inside were printouts, photos, **TS, flight details, calendar entries, a map, 2 of the cufflink photos. I included one reflection photo, the one with Colin's hand on Jessica's knee, and a couple of cropped messages. I didn't include everything, just enough. I didn't want to overwhelm Sarah. I wanted her to understand clearly, quickly, undeniably. I found their address online. Suburban, clean, two-story with a white fence and trimmed hedges. The kind of house where people smiled over coffee and dogs barked at delivery trucks. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, watching the wind nudge the tree branches. This wasn't revenge. This was symmetry. I got out, walked up the driveway, and rang the bell. A chime echoed inside. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps. Then the door opened. She looked exactly as I remembered. Hair tied up, no makeup, sweatshirt, barefoot, but still composed, like someone who didn't need armor to feel strong. She looked at me, confused at first, then cautious. Yes? Hi, I said, keeping my voice calm. My name is Steve. I think we need to talk. Just 10 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Steve? I didn't wait for her to connect the dots. I held up the folder. I'm Jessica's husband. Silence. She stepped back. Not away, just out of the doorway. Come in. The living room was neat. Lived in, not staged. A mug on the coffee table. A folded blanket on the armrest. A scented candle burned low near the window. The air smelled like vanilla and something warmer I couldn't place. I sat on the edge of the couch. She sat across from me, legs crossed, hands on her knees. What is this about? She asked. I didn't answer. Not with words. I handed her the folder. She opened it, slowly, and began flipping through. No gasp. No tears. No dramatic reactions. Just eyes that sharpened with every page. Her fingers stayed steady, her breathing even. But I could feel the room shifting around her. When she reached the last page, she closed the folder gently and set it on the table. Then she looked at me and said one sentence. Did they hide all this from us? Or from themselves? I didn't have an answer. She nodded slowly, almost to herself, then leaned back, eyes unfocused, as if watching the last year of her life in reverse. I had a feeling, she said quietly. Not certainty, just gaps. You know? The little silences you tell yourself not to worry about. I nodded. She looked at me again. Thank you. I shook my head. I'm not here for thanks. No, she said. But I'm giving it anyway. We didn't say much after that. There wasn't anything else to explain. As I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Before I stepped out, she said something that stayed with me for days afterward. You didn't just give me the truth. You gave me permission to stop lying to myself. I nodded. I knew exactly what she meant. Then the door closed behind me. Not slammed. Not forced. Just a clean, final sound. And somehow it echoed louder than any fight I'd ever had. She came home on Tuesday like nothing had changed. Smiling, coat over her arm, chatting about traffic. I waited until she finished speaking, then told her simply, I know. First she froze. Then came the routine. Denial, confusion, tears. She tried to flip the script, blamed me for being distant, for not seeing her anymore. I didn't argue. I let her say it all, every word rehearsed to defend what couldn't be defended. Then I stood, walked to the hallway, grabbed my bag, left my keys on the table. She followed, voice rising. So that's it? You're just leaving? I looked at her, really looked, and realized I already had, long before that night, long before Seattle, maybe even before Colin. I gave you every chance, I said. You used everyone to lie, and I walked out. I live in a smaller place now. High window, quiet mornings, no more pretending. I hired a lawyer. It's clean, quiet, efficient. I don't talk about her much. Don't need to. Weeks passed. Then Sarah texted, Thank you. I would have kept lying to myself much longer if it weren't for you. A week later, Jessica sent a letter. Long, emotional, full of reasons. I read it once. Didn't respond. Instead, I sat on the balcony, made coffee, watched the light stretch across the city. No noise. No apologies looping in my head. Just stillness. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But it was peace. And for now, that was enough.